Adventures, as well as UF IFAS Extension Miami-Dade Sea Grant. And we will be posting each week's or each bi-weekly conservation topic on there. If you'd like to receive an email reminder with the conservation topics coming up and the registration links, please email Anna, which we will put her email address in the chat box, or let us know if you want to be added to that list. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to today's presenter, Anna Zangroniz.
Great, thanks so much, Ed. It's nice to see a bunch of returning faces, really your names, and a bunch of new names as well. So thanks for joining us. All right, let's get this party started. As Ed mentioned, we will be recording this and we'll be sending you the link for you to access later. And for those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Anna Zangroniz, and I am the Florida Sea Grant Extension Agent here in Miami-Dade County. And this is what I look like when I have coffee and when I'm put together, but really this is what I look like most of the time. And I just wanted to include this photograph because normally every year during lobster mini season, on one or if not both days, I'm normally found at the ramps of Black Point Marina, assisting my colleagues and partners at Biscayne National Park with lobster surveys. Sadly, that effort will not be taking place this year for obvious reasons, but I will discuss a little bit of that data later on in the presentation. First, I will be talking about what exactly lobster mini season is, rules and regulations that are important to have in mind, safety considerations, and then, of course, my secret ulterior motive, a little bit of lobster biology and ecology for your scientific enjoyment, and then simple economic figures and fun facts. The first thing I'd like everyone to do is think for a moment and answer this question. Ed is going to pull this up so you'll be able to participate momentarily. What is the minimum legal harvest size in carapace length for harvest of lobster in Florida? You can use your mouse and just click on your response. Is it A, 72 millimeters, B, 74 millimeters, C, 76 millimeters, or D, 78 millimeters? So give it your best guess. And we'll leave that open for maybe 30 more seconds or so. And if you have no idea, please don't stress. This is simply to increase your knowledge about lobsters and this event, which is a pretty big draw here in South Florida.
All right, I think we got everyone accounted for.
Awesome. Thank you, Ed.
Yep.
We're going to answer that question in just a couple of seconds. And that brings us to what is lobster mini season? When I worked in a resource management field, all natural resource managers had this type of reaction that it's pandemonium, it's very stressful, it's very busy on the water. And that's certainly true, but reality, spiny lobster mini or sport season is the name for the 2-day fishing period that takes place the last consecutive Wednesday and Thursday of every July. And what this means is that it allows for recreational fishers only to hunt for lobster before commercial fishermen can put their traps out to soak. So this event is considered simply for the recreational fishermen. And species targeted in this event, by and large, are the Caribbean spiny lobster, Panalurus argus, also lobsters in the Scilaridae genus or slipper lobsters, as well as Panalurus guttatus, which is the spotted lobster. And spiny lobsters can be distinguished by their long antennae and the lack of claws on their first 4 pairs of legs. And they're found in their greatest numbers in depths from 0 to 50 meters, which is about 50 feet. This is a fishing license required activity. So not only if you are looking to harvest lobster, do you need a Florida saltwater fishing license? You also must have the lobster stamp and lobster permit. They must be up to date and current. It's recommended that you have it in person, although, however, with the advent of cell phones and technology, it's much easier to pull these up on a smartphone these days, but definitely recommended to have it with you. When it comes to fishing, you can use the following approaches. You can free dive or snorkel or work on breath hold. You can scuba dive, and you can also bully net. And the major takeaway, no matter what approach you choose, there is not to be any sort of spearing or puncturing of the lobsters. That is not legal in Florida. Instead, you are going to be using a combination of any of these tools, including a tickle stick and a net and a bag. So again, no spearing, that is illegal in Florida. The lobster limit, in other words, the maximum amount of lobsters that you're allowed to keep or harvest per day depends on where you are. If you are within the waters of Biscayne National Park or Monroe County, which are all of the Florida Keys, you are allowed 6 per person per day. Elsewhere in Florida, in other words, northern Miami-Dade County, Broward County, Palm Beach County, etc., you are allowed 12 per person per day. How do you know what you get to keep? You have to measure them. The minimum size is a 76 millimeter carapace length. So for those of you who guessed 76 millimeters on the poll question, you were correct. That is exactly 3 inches. I do want to point out that there are areas within Miami-Dade County and the Keys where lobstering is not allowed. Please note that this yellow squiggle is not to scale. You are not allowed to take, this is indicating the Biscayne Bay Card Sound Lobster Sanctuary, which more or less is all of the area of Biscayne Bay that's protected by Biscayne National Park, as well as extending a little bit further south into Card Sound. You may also not take from John Pennekamp Coral Reef State Park, Everglades National Park, Dry Tortugas National Park, the no-take areas within the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, and also the new 5 coral reef protection areas in Biscayne National Park. And these regulations apply both during lobster mini season as well as the regular season. Because these are so new, I wanted to take this opportunity and share them with you. The new 5 coral reef protection areas within Biscayne National Park from north to south are around Fowey Rocks Light, Alina's Reef, Lob 120 Reef, Marker 3 Reef, and Ball Buoy Reef. Again, my circles and outlines are not to scale. I strongly recommend that you check the exact coordinates of all of these boundaries. They're available on the nps.gov/BISC website, as well as myfwc.com. Additional resources that I'm happy to provide you with include slightly older versions, but the regulatory information is still the same, of lobstering rules and regulations. I'm happy to email you these PDFs. Or if you like free stuff in your hands, I will be thrilled to send you a print copy of this fishing and angling guide to Biscayne Bay. It's printed on waterproof paper. It's meant to be on a boat, and it has up close, more easy to read and navigate with all of the aids to navigation, a lot of the GPS coordinates throughout Biscayne Bay, etc. So if you'd like to receive either of these, please indicate so in the chat and Ed will follow up with me later. And don't worry about not wanting paper things. I have to say that in all of my experience boating and being on the water, the GPS is wonderful until it doesn't work. So it's really important to have a backup copy. And when these were printed, there were about 75,000 or so copies printed. So I have plenty. So Merry Christmas and happy holidays to your friends and family from me. The measurement of the spiny lobster is really important because this determines what lobsters you're permitted to legally keep. And so if you look on the photos on the right, you're measuring the carapace length, which must be at least 3 inches. And you're measuring the tough or bonier area that's between the horns all the way back through the end of the body. And to do this, you're utilizing a caliper or lobster gauge. This must be done in the water and the lobster must be kept alive. These types of tools are widely available from your local bait and tackle shop to scuba diving outfitters, or even through things like Amazon.com. This is probably your most important piece of equipment when lobstering. Probably the most critical of all the regulations is that you cannot keep a gravid female lobster. What does gravid mean? Well, first of all, before we get there, how do you know? And this is one of my favorite things to teach people every summer. How do you know what is a male lobster and a female lobster? If you look at the photograph on the left, you'll see that the female lobsters have an extra set of swimmerettes, or these feathery pleopods. And these aren't so important in terms of determining what you can keep because the size is the same. However, if you find this is a clutch of eggs which the female is guarding under her tail. If you bring up a lobster, regardless of its size, you may not keep a female lobster that is egg-bearing or gravid. That is a big no-no and will result in major, major fines. When it comes to lobster mini season and the recreational season for that matter, it's really important to think about all of the things that you need to have at your disposal to try and ensure the safest environment possible. One of those items is a dive flag. This is helpful because not only if it's mounted on your boat and it has to extend above the highest point of your boat so that it's most visible, it's also nice to have it in the water, usually attached to a person, whether they're free diving or scuba diving or using hookah, because then you really know where that person is, and especially if you can't see the bottom. This is also an immediate indicator to other boaters that they must be slowing down when they're traveling within 300 feet of you. And that's their immediate red flag, haha, that they have that there's someone in the water and they should be on the lookout. Other things to consider are safety equipment for your boat, making sure that you have the correct number of flotation devices available on board for everyone who needs to wear one. And for those who are required to wear one, they must have them on. Making sure you have a sufficient amount of anchor line attached to your anchor, as well as the other standard safety equipment like fire extinguisher, your flares are up to date, etc. These are all things that law enforcement will be out in force checking on, particularly during this season and ticketing. So not only for your own safety and the safety of the people with you, you want to make sure that you're not getting a ticket for a silly reason that your flare is 2 months out of date. Other considerations are making sure that you have enough proper equipment to keep yourself hydrated and fed while you're out on the water. Something that's highly recommended is double checking the local conditions on this day. In my experience over the last 6 years in South Florida, it has either been really hot with no wind or really hot and ferocious wind. And so I'm sure you all know wind makes waves, and also the current is an important factor in deciding where you're going to dive, how deep you're going to dive. Working with your buddies, even if it's one person free diving and the other person's watching them from the surface, and also acknowledging and being truthful about your level of physical competency and abilities. And then the big thing is also to remember to plan your dive and dive your plan. What does lobster mini season mean for the environment? It means a really large amount of concentration, or a large concentration of people and boats, usually in pretty small areas. So to help reduce the risk to the bottom resources, specifically coral reefs, it's important to use mooring buoys whenever you can. This will relieve you of the duty of having to anchor your boat and provide you a safe way in and out of the water. It's also really easy to find your boat when it's attached to a mooring buoy. If you can't use mooring buoys, or they're not available, or they're all full, if it's possible, try to anchor in the sand outside your reef patch or wherever you're working. There's an app for this. It's called Southeast Florida's Reefs, and you can actually use it, and it will pick up your GPS location and show you where there is sand nearby to your reef spot where you can safely drop your anchor. And the final thought is an important one to think about, and that's not using coral heads or the reef structure to stabilize yourself and hold yourself down when going for your lobster. It's unfortunate, but sometimes these little ledges and grooves seem to make very convenient handholds for people. And we've seen over the years where in the time following lobster mini season, we found lots of toppled or dislodged corals. So just remembering to be respectful of the environment, and that they're not, those corals and those ledges aren't there for that purpose. So to be very careful when you're diving in and around them. And, you know, a lot of people are wondering, why do we have all these rules? And it's pretty easy. You know, it's a conservation and fisheries management idea, because we want there to be more lobsters in the future, not just for us, but for our children, for the environment, and also because they are a major food source. Seafood is an important food source that is growing throughout the future. And here's where I trap you guys and give you a little bit more science. The Caribbean spiny lobster has a pretty large distribution range. You can see it indicated in this map here in the slightly red or purple color. And that range extends all the way east from Bermuda throughout the Atlantic coast of the United States, the shelf waters of Gulf of Mexico, throughout the Caribbean Sea, and all the way through South America. And spiny lobsters are an important intermediate species indicator, because not only do they prey upon a lot of things, but they are predated upon as well. And you can see here that loggerhead turtles, gray triggerfish, snapper and grouper species are just a few of the species that prey upon Caribbean spiny lobster. And in turn, those spiny lobster have a pretty wide variety of food sources, including mollusks, bivalves, and crustaceans. A review of some of the lobster studies showed that their prey items were different depending on where in the world they were located. In St. John, Herkind et al. Found that gastropods were the main prey of juvenile lobsters. However, crustaceans were more prevalent in adult lobsters. Espinosa et al. Found that mollusks, mostly gastropods, were the diet of larger lobster captured in seagrass and reefs off of Cuba. And then Andre found small gastropods and crustaceans in fecal contents of smaller lobster within Biscayne National Park. You can see that the common denominator here, despite the region, despite the area, was the gastropod consumption. But all of these studies indicate that the lobsters are pretty good at foraging and finding food and making diet in whatever's locally available. Spiny lobster have also been found to feed on algae or detritus, which is waste material. And those who know this sometimes have said this little moniker and called lobster cockroaches of the sea. And you all might have heard this. This is an expression, it's unknown where it came from, that traditionally refers to lobsters. And it started out, this expression was given to the blue American lobster. So despite this comparison between benthic or bottom-dwelling invertebrates and land-based bugs, lobsters are really safe to eat. In fact, the Monterey Bay Seafood Watch has recommended the Caribbean spiny lobster for consumption in the United States. It's considered a good alternative. And this is determined through a really comprehensive review process that looks very critically at the way the fishery is managed as well as stock assessment. And if you'd like to read the full report, it's available on their website, all 54 pages of it. You can also research reports for other seafood species as well. Lobsters show lots of similarities in their behaviors, specifically foraging behaviors throughout Florida and the Caribbean. They forage at night. They also travel in large groups in little choo-choo trains together at night. And what's really cool is that the mature male lobsters guard these dens, and they guard their dens full of reproductively ready female lobsters, and they're nicknamed harems. So yes, they guard their dens full of harems, which they will proceed to fertilize during spawning season. They'll fertilize several female lobsters at a time. The mature males also establish and defend their mating areas. One particular study that came from Belize estimated that the maturity level or the maturity age, and that's referring to reproductive maturity, based upon their size indicated an 86 millimeter carapace length for females and 98 millimeter carapace length for males. So that's not substantially, but it's certainly larger than the minimum carapace length that we have here. And that's not to say that the 76 carapace length is too small. It simply means that those lobster, if they're being harvested closer to that carapace length, simply aren't as fertile as they could be if they were a little bit larger and a little bit older. The spring and into early summer is the lobster spawning season, and that's about March through June, which, if you all know, the regular lobster season is closed for approximately that amount of time here in Florida. And there's a lot of debate within the scientific community about where the lobster that we harvest here in Florida, where those larvae come from. And Young and Lee found that the upper Florida Keys is likely where the larvae are coming in from being moved around by the current. So that's likely where we're getting our lobster from, is that entry point. Here in this picture, we have the underside of a female Caribbean spiny lobster. And this black spot, this is called a spermatophore, which is a protein capsule containing the mass of sperm, which is transferred during mating by the male. And this spermatophore will fertilize the bright orange eggs that she has under their abdomen. And something really interesting is that in fished areas, small spiny lobsters may produce a few 100,000 eggs. However, lobsters that are protected by marine reserves and grow larger can produce millions of eggs in several clutches. This infographic is specific to the Bahamas, but the information that it's depicting is pretty similar to what is thought to happen here in the Caribbean and Florida. But mature spiny lobsters spawn at least once, but older lobsters typically spawn 3 times per year. At a minimum, females at their harvest size can produce around 300,000 eggs per clutch, but females just 1 year older and larger likely produce 3 clutches of 680,000 eggs. The larvae from these eggs can disperse widely, leaving Florida and US waters, and likewise arriving in Florida from distant locations in the Caribbean. Juvenile lobsters usually spend their first few years in nearshore seagrass beds, clumps of red macroalgae, and other areas with hard-bottom substrate, while adults favor rocky substrates, reefs, and areas that provide protection. Just like other species and ecosystems that we've discussed throughout this webinar series, Caribbean spiny lobsters face a number of both natural and anthropogenic stressors or threats. And if you look, the bottom few that are highlighted these all have to do directly, they all run together. Poaching is pretty obvious, and that's the illegal take of lobsters, whether it be out of season, taking beyond their limit, or harvesting lobsters that are undersized, or a combination of all three. But these topics of coastal development, nutrient runoff and water quality, loss of habitat, and alteration of local hydrological cycles, they all run together and ultimately lead to loss of or degradation of nearshore habitats like seagrass that are critical to the development of juvenile lobsters. We're going to transition here into some economic figures, and I'm going to ask Ed to pull up another little quiz for me. And again, if you all would just use your mouse to choose your answer. What is the estimated value of the Monroe County, so that's Florida Keys, commercial spiny lobster fishery from 2016 to 2020? Is it A, $136,000, B, $136 million, C, $148,000, or D, $148 million? So go ahead and give it your best guess. We'll give it about 30 more seconds, and we'll see how you guys did. All right, Ed, would you please go ahead and close that?
Okay, I almost got everyone accounted for.
Cool. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, everybody. All right, you're going to get your answer in just a second, so try to control your excitement. I know you're at the edge of your seat. Now, I bring up the commercial spiny lobster fishery simply because this one we have substantial data from the FWC, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And if we compare the commercial spiny lobster fishery in Miami-Dade versus Monroe, you'll see that in Miami-Dade County, there from 2016 to 2020, there's about 31,000 pounds of lobster caught. And this is the lobster pot or lobster trap fishery. Average price per pound is $7.34. And the estimated value in Miami-Dade County is about $235,000. If you're at all familiar with the Florida Keys, you may be aware that the spiny lobster fishery is a huge, huge fishery and incredibly important to its economy. And in comparison, we have over 18 million pounds of lobster caught. Average price per pound is $7.99. And the estimated value of the Monroe County commercial spiny lobster fishery is just about $148 million. I would like to note that the data for 2016 through 2018 are final. The 2019 and 2020 figures are semi-final, but this is the estimation as of right now. There isn't quite the same data collection for lobster mini season as there is for the commercial spiny lobster fishery. And the last thing I wanted to put up is that Biscayne National Park has been doing creel surveys, or essentially fisheries dependent surveys, at 2 boat ramps since 2002, pretty much every year since 2002. And these surveys, which are conducted by staff and volunteers, have counted a total of 86,569 lobsters through that 2-day period, an average of 4,800 lobsters counted per year. And the data analyzed from 2002 to 2015 have indicated that male lobsters have been landed or harvested twice as often as female lobsters. And this could be likely, it could be due to the fact that the female lobsters do have that restriction because they can't be kept if they're gravid or egg bearing. And then when looking at the species landed, you'll see that the Caribbean spiny lobster is almost 100%, but next in place at about an average of 14% is the spotted spiny lobster, and 12% of these landings over time were the variations of the slipper lobster. And I don't know if this was the record, but this lobster right here was the record in this year, which was 2016. If I remember correctly, it's 146 millimeter carapace length or 5.7 inches. And so, you know, clearly a really great day for those people who harvested this lobster. And so before I leave you, I just want to give you all a few things to keep in mind, both next week during lobster mini season and moving forward. And that's to please abide by the local rules and regulations. And keeping those in mind, enjoying yourself, but also being cautious when it comes to your own safety, the safety of your friends and family, and caring for the environment. And hopefully perhaps thinking about lobsters and the other creatures that are in the ocean as you're out there. Because what lobster mini season and what the principles of conservation and fisheries management involve trying to preserve all of these resources, both from an an ecological as well as human perspective. And when we think about the management agencies that are in the area, we have the National Park Service, National Marine Sanctuaries, and the Florida Park Service. In all of the language, the mission statements and the vision statements for these entities include the protection of or conservation of and restoration of, also includes for future generations. And so I put that challenge out there to you as you go out, whether it be next week or later this summer or next year, and try to remember that all of these agencies exist to try and balance the uses and protection of these resources. And the last thing I want to ask of you all is just to go ahead and take one tiny little poll. This is just for our record keeping purposes. Ed, if you would pull that up, please. I'm asking you just to indicate your level of agreement. I learned something from participating in this webinar. Strongly agree, agree, or disagree, and how many people were watching this webinar, including yourself. And I will leave that up. And as you finish that up, I want to thank you all so much for joining us. We appreciate your flexibility as we've moved into this new format, and we look forward to seeing you back here on Wednesday, August 12th, where my colleague, Dr. Ashley Smith, will be discussing eutrophication. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Ed. Thank you guys all so much.
All right. Great job, Anna. Thanks so much for all that info. It is now a little past 12:30, so if you have to leave, that's totally fine. We will be staying on to answer any questions that you have. I already see a few questions in our chat. Again, as a reminder, we did record this webinar, and we will send the link to the broadcast out. Anna will send that via email, and that way you can share that with anyone who didn't get a chance to join us today. We hope that you will join us again for our next conservation conversation. Please stay safe and well. And Anna, if you don't mind turning on your camera, that way we can go ahead and answer some of these questions.
All right, I hope you all can see me. My screen setup is a little funky.
We see you.
Cool.
All right, I'm gonna start out. We have a few questions. I'm gonna start out with Joe. He had a couple questions. The first one, are they going to close mini season next week due to COVID? Thought I'd start with that one.
Hi, Joe. Yeah, that's a great question. Right now, I know that the Board of County Commissioners, that's specific to Monroe County, Board of County Commissioners were meeting this week to discuss that. And I believe they've made the ask of FWC, but at this point, it's likely that it's going to continue as normal. And certainly it will still apply. It will still happen as scheduled in Miami-Dade County as well. I haven't heard otherwise up to this point, but I have my secret spies throughout the Keys who are keeping me in the know.
All right. And then Joe also he had a question when we were talking about the sizes. why don't they raise the size to the reproductive size?
Well, Joe, that was one particular study, and that study was done in Belize. So I would imagine that, I mean, you've been around and in this arena for quite some time, so you've seen the process that it takes to try and get some of these fisheries management regulations put together. You know, there is a scientific branch of FWC, and that's called FWRI, the Fish and Wildlife Research Institute. So they would have to do a pretty scientific set of studies locally to try and get that established. You know, it certainly seems like allowing, for the same reasons that regulations are changed to allow fish to get bigger and hopefully reproduce more before they're caught. You know, it seems like it would be a great idea, and that might be something that someday down the line you or one of your colleagues could propose. But I'm sure that that 76 millimeter carapace length was established because it was found that at least when a lobster, by the time it's reached that size, it does have the ability to reproduce. So, and you know, those processes can be really challenging and timely to change, but it's not to say that they won't, but they would definitely need to make a have that science-based recommendation and to move that process forward.
Great. All right, moving on. Juan would like to know, are recreational hoop nets legal for lobster?
Hoop nets?
Yeah.
You know, one, I'm not sure, but I'm writing this down on my trusty list, and I will double check that and follow up with you. If you registered through the link, I have your email address, and I will definitely follow back up with you regarding hoop nets.
All right, thanks for that question, Juan. Joe would like to know, are there any efforts to make shark feeding illegal?
Joe, I believe that chumming for sharks is illegal in state waters. In terms of federal waters, again, complicated rulemaking, rule-changing process. But in state waters, I know shark feeding is definitely illegal. And this came in the last 5 years. There was an operation, a dive operation in Jupiter that was getting a lot of attention because they were chumming for sharks in state waters. And so that helped clarify some of the confusion, but definitely illegal in state waters. In terms of federal rule, I believe that's something that the South Atlantic Fisheries Management Council would have to consider, since they help develop a lot of the fisheries regulations in federal waters.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I think that that's where we're at currently with that particular effort. Any other questions or comments for Anna? All righty. Well, if you guys have any follow-up questions, feel free. Anna's email is there. And again, we will, if you want to be added to the list to get the topics for the upcoming webinars, just go ahead and shoot us an email, and we will go ahead and get you on that list. But thanks so much, Anna, and thank you all for joining us today. We really enjoyed having you, and I hope you guys, if you do participate, have a great lobster mini season.
Be safe, everybody. We'll see you back here on August 12th.
Bye now.